Hello! So, the My Little Pony movie is one of those things in the MLP community that has always been divided. Some people absolutely love it, and others hate it. And then there's people like me that think, it was alright. And that's not inherently bad. While some things about the movie like the story or villain felt rushed and uninspired, then you have the new characters, the songs, and outstanding animation, because yeah, I really love those aspects about the movie. Plus, I watched the movie when it came out, so I'm a little bit biased, but to me it was always a solid 6 out of 10, which got me wondering how different was the movie originally? What changes did they make to get the movie we ended up getting, and was it better or worse? Well, that's what I want to find out. Something that not much people realize is how long the production of the MLP movie was, and I don't say that lightly. While production started back in 2015, this was just the current version we know. The idea of the MLP movie started as early as 2012, back when season 2 had ended, which sounds insane at first. Friendship is Magic was exploding in popularity at the time, so Hasbro wanted to capitalize on that success made sense at the time. So they started to plan a movie deal in conjunction with Old Spark Pictures and written by Joe Ballerini and co-written by Megan McCarthy. But that didn't last, as Joe would be kicked out of the project 1 month later, and we really don't know why. And the problems didn't stop there. The staff suffered. The writers, artists, and even producers would go through a bunch of changes and setbacks, and one of the most glaring ones being the story of the movie. In simple words, no one knew how to adapt the show into a movie, and honestly, I can't blame them. One thing is making a slice of life episode, and another one is trying to make a full-length movie with that concept. And while we don't know what the scrapped stories were, we do have the concept arts of what it would have been. Aside of that, we also have some scrapped concepts of the Storm King's kingdom and base, and they look cool and weird. Some of these look cool and interesting enough that surprised me that they were scrapped. And then we have this, which looks less like My Little Pony and more like Cyberpunk. And if I didn't tell you that this was originally supposed to be the Storm King's kingdom, I don't think you would have guessed it just by looking at it. And now that we are in that topic, the Storm King went through some of the biggest changes in the entire development. Originally, he was depicted as a literal storm creature that would have shapeshifted, uninspired, but I actually quite like it. And then we have a 4-legged mix of a dragon and a wolf with 3 eyes, or a tall, intimidating godlike figure that actually looks pretty cool. And fun fact, the stat that he would have used, he would have stole from T-Rex brother. But going back to this design, while it seems weird and random, it really wasn't. This fits a character called the Storm King, and this design invokes that. He's a creature that half of his body is ice and the other half is lightning. That is cool as hell. And if you're wondering, yes, he would have been able to use both elemental powers at will. Yeah, it defeated the purpose of him using the staff, but at this point that wasn't the point of his story. Also, side note, despite the designers calling him a Raijin, he isn't accurate to Raijins in Japanese mythology, not in design or in powers. Now, do I care that much? No, he looks cool and menacing enough to be a villain, but I thought it was worth mentioning. And that wasn't all, as his personality also changed. Tell me, what personality does the Storm King have in the movie? Yeah, he was goofy, dumb, and overconfident, and those aren't necessarily bad traits. I mean, Discord had that and he worked as a villain. The difference is that those were literally his entire personality. I'll give Discord a little bit of credit. He knew when to get serious and threatening, and even then, he didn't even have to do that to be menacing. That's not the case with the Storm King, at least in the movie. Originally, he was going to be a cold, manipulative, and deceptive villain that would have killed his subjects without even hesitation. Yes, you heard that correctly. Have you ever wondered how the Storm King became as feared as he was? Well, that's easy, by killing anyone who opposed him. Take for example the cats. The Storm King asked the king and queen of Abyssinia to join his cause and rule Equestria together, and when they opposed him, he ordered his troops to kill the king and queen and destroy the kingdom, except for one, the king's and queen's son, who because of this event outlawed magic and any creature that had magic out of his city in the future. Why did the Storm King left him alive? for kicks. That is called psychopathic, and I love it. It suits him better as a fear conqueror that everyone would fear, because I'm sorry, I do not believe that Silver Shrimp would be scared of this goofy guy. Also, if you're wondering how do we know all of this, well, it's because this concept for the Storm King's personality and story was reworked for his story in the prequel comics, which just makes you wonder why change this design and story aside of being a little bit too dark for kids. Well, there's an actual reason. In the words of the character designers and animators, part of the reason why his design was changed was because he looked better as a biped and because it was easier to animate 2 legs instead of 4. Also, we wanted him to be a goofier character. Okay, sure, I kind of understand that, but what do you mean by it was easier to animate him as a biped? Hasbro, were you cheaping out even back in the day? But hey, at least we got to see what his original version would have been. Ironic because even with this design he looks intimidating and cool, so I just think that I wanted him to be a goofier character and that's it. I already took an extensive look at Tempest development, so I will not repeat myself, but there's some things that I left out of that video. I know that there were people who loved this design, but if I'm honest, the more that I look at it, the more I dislike it. And not because it's a bad concept, because it's not. A pony that can take the abilities of other creatures and being able to use them is such an interesting and cool concept. But that's all that it was. She barely looks like a character that would fit in G4 and more like a fan OC, which would be fine if this design in any way could have worked in the plot of the movie, but it didn't. For any artists or writers, your design can look as cool as possible, but if it serves no purpose to the story, then it's kinda useless. Which leads me into this design. This looks more in line with what you expect an LPG4 character to look like. His design, yes, I said he, because Tempest originally was going to be a stallion, looks cool and interesting enough for the movie to expand on him. Or so you would think. Yeah, while his design is good, his story was the main problem. He would have been Luna and Celestia's brother, and here's where the problem lies. This story would have raised a lot of questions, and not in a good way, as it would have contradicted the story that we already knew. And I know that My Little Pony has continuity issues, but those ones can be understood to a degree. This one can't. Aside of his story and concept and being the trope of mysterious never seen before brother, he wasn't an alicorn. And I don't think I need to explain why that's a problem. And as a whole, while Tempest had a less than great development process, both because of constant changes to her story, design, and with Hasbro getting impatient to the point of almost scrapping her, which it didn't happen thanks to Megan McCarthy, and I'm glad that didn't happen because despite all, Tempest is a fantastic character that we're lucky to have. So, who remembers Grubber? If you don't, I don't blame you. Grubber is a character that not many people liked. Ironic because Megan McCarthy stated that we always knew he was going to be a funny character. And out of all the characters from the original concept, he's the one that didn't change, like at all. Not in design, which fun fact was partially based on one of the designer's dogs as well as his personality, and with that you may expect that would be all. However, there's a detail that makes Grubber's character kinda disturbing. Have you ever wondered what his purpose in the Storm King's army aside of being Tempest's second in command was? Well, originally he was going to be a spy and war strategist for the Storm King, and one that would have used his laid-back and goofy personality to manipulate others to gain their trust. This aspect makes his whole purpose in the movie kinda disturbing, because that would imply that he might have spied on the hippogriffs and cats before their kingdoms were destroyed, which makes you look at him in a different light. But one that actually makes more sense as you understand why he stayed in the Storm King's army for so long, but that sadly got scrapped. I don't have a lot to say about Captain Celano. I think she was fine. She and her crew were sympathetic characters that you genuinely understood why they were stuck serving the Storm King. But that wasn't always the case, and it's kinda surprising that the pirates originally were gonna have a more darker and aggressive look to them, which made sense because originally they were supposed to be villains, an aspect I think would have been interesting. And I think you know where this is going, because they could have been reformed. I know people are going to say that MLP and the fandom overuses the aspect of redemption arcs, and to a degree they do, but in this case it would have been cool to see how the main six would have convinced them to turn against the Storm King, or how friendship could have helped their cause. And while a lot of these concepts look cool, especially the ships, I get why they were cut. Well, kinda. On one hand, the script shifted the narrative of them being villains, so these designs wouldn't have worked. But in the other hand, the reason why their ship was changed was because the animators didn't want to animate the more complex details, which was the same case with the Storm King. A shame to say the least, but hey, I get it. Capper is one of those characters that, if I'm honest, I wasn't the biggest fan at first. I felt that his whole story was incredibly generic, and his turn to being good felt underwhelming, especially after what he was willing to do to the main six for money. And aside of finally seeing the cat species in a big story, I just felt that he was very mishandled. But of course, those feelings have changed over the years, mainly thanks to the comics, where they expanded on his story, which was pretty tragic, and in a way I identified with him and his struggles, as a character that even in his own society is seen as an outsider, but one that overcomes that and becomes a hero. And while he was good, he could have been so much better. The original concepts of Capper showed him as a fox that would have had a sentient scorpion tail that would have expressed his true motives behind his cheerful facade, which would have been such a cool and insane new species on its own, but also it made more sense with him being a deceptive character. I'm sorry, but when I think of a sly deceptive character, I don't think of a cat, I think of a fox. Although he also went to other species like a husky, honey badger, and a whistle. But aside of that, his name was also masterfully chosen. His name was going to be Mendax, which in Latin meant liar, and his role in the movie would have been exactly the same as the one we saw, with one exception. Rarity would have helped him come to terms with a deformity he had, in this case an extra set of eyes, which fits Rarity extremely well, and reminded me of when she helped other creatures to see the beauty on themselves. And if you haven't noticed, I'm just a very big fan of this design. Again, the Capper that we got isn't bad, but wow, if it could have been such a cooler concept altogether, and one that would have not only fitted the movie, but in my opinion, benefited it, exploring the themes of accepting yourself as who you are and not by what others tell you to. That and the dynamic between him and his tail, who might have been the one tempting him to betray others or to do stuff just to survive, is a concept that feels more fleshed out than the one we ended up getting, as well as introducing a new and unique species to the show that, at least compared to other furry species in G4, isn't just a cat or a dog, and one I feel that the community would have loved. And finally, the sea ponies, who, again, I already talked extensively about in this video, but I do like both species, and to a degree they're almost the same, at least on lore. And while it's sad that the species never picked up in popularity, I'm more surprised that the movie was going to make them a more aggressive species that would have been distrustful to outsiders, which is kinda understandable after an outsider destroyed their original home, as well as being more closely resembled to seahorses, and even featuring 2 scrap sequences. Remember when Twilight tried to steal the transformation pearl from Queen Novo? Well, originally the idea was to send the main six to a prison guarded by an anglerfish called Theodore that Fluttershy would have befriended, and honestly that's kind of adorable. And that's without mentioning the other creatures that we would have seen, like eels, manta rays, and what it looks like a Dunkleosteus. And the second being the old climax of the movie, where the sea ponies would have come back as hippogriffs to help the main six fight against the Storm King, a scene that was fully storyboarded but didn't make it into the movie, as in the words of the writers that would have lost focus on the main six and they wanted them to be the heroes, which yeah, I get, but honestly I think this climax would have been a better fit to the movie than the one we ended up getting, as it would have given the sea ponies and the hippogriffs their moment to shine. And it's not like it would have been out of place for how they were established in the movie originally. On the contrary, I feel like this would have given them a bigger role than the one we saw, because in my opinion at one point the sea ponies felt like a gimmick that was used for a cool moment and merch, then telling its own story. And when G5 has a more fleshed out underwater world than G4, I think that says a lot. But for how much the crew had to fight to just put them in the movie, honestly I can't judge them too hard. The My Little Pony movie wasn't the best nor the worst thing ever. In my opinion, it's a solid 6 out of 10, but what we didn't get for the most part was just better, either in characterization, story, or message. And it's hard not to admit that the original concepts would have been amazing and one that I feel would have re-sparked the interest in the franchise in a point where it was losing a little bit of its steam. But because of Hasbro's bad development, or just being too dark, complex, or maybe too expensive, we didn't. But hey, this is probably just me, so tell me what you think of these concepts in the comments. And hey, if you're new here and ended up liking this video, remember to like and subscribe as that shows me that I did a decent job. And hey, why not check out my other videos while you're at it? As for me, I'll see you in the next video.